Welcome to today's edition of the Human School's Mindshift Cards Conversations, a part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Chad.
I'm Rachel.
I'm Randy.
And I'm Dustin.
Each week, we model brief inquiry conversations around one of the Mindshift cards in our Mindshift Cards pack. If you want to explore further questions, there are card sets available at thehuman.school. In this episode, our question comes from our storyteller Compass Point. And the question is, what messages do you tell yourself that might hold you back from sharing your story? So would anybody like to start?
I can start. This is a question that is near and dear to my heart, because I think one of the things that holds most of us back is the belief that it's just us, that whatever it is that we are experiencing or worried about or wanting, that other people won't understand or they don't experience the same thing, and that we'll be ridiculed or mocked or ignored or dismissed for sharing that. And so I think one of the things that I feel over and over again, not just for myself, but lots of people, teaching in a school, you hear it all the time from kids, this belief that there isn't anyone who will understand us or who will feel the way we feel or believe what we believe or want what we want. And that keeps us from sharing, that fear that we will, I guess, get confirmation of that.
So I have one word, and I think it's courage. And the reason why I say that is I've been working with a bunch of people in a master's program who are finishing up their action research and their thesis. And all of them seem to be lacking courage in actually sharing their research with the people that should hear it. For example, somebody did some really interesting work around how do you navigate as a teacher? How do you navigate when you have a scripted curriculum? Like how it's so dehumanizing, it's so soul-sucking. How do you combat that as a teacher? So she did this really fascinating research, and I said, so how are you going to share that? Are you going to share it with your principal? Are you going to share it with your superintendent? And just fearful of doing that. And I think that's just one example of a lot of us will be so fearful of something that we don't have the courage to put that story out there because we feel like our identity might be attacked or we might be labeled or something like that. So I think courage or lack of courage holds us back.
I feel like it's reminiscent of whenever a teacher asks a question of the class and no one answers because like they're all afraid of being wrong and wants everyone to think of my answer. Like, will I get validation if I speak up or not? Am I right to think that my experience is valid?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that as well, and being like really touching on the storyteller part of this from the cards, is the navigating from ignoring what happened to learning from what happened, and like really wrestling with your experience that you've gone through to share it. Is what I went through something valid that I can share with people that they can learn from? And is this something that needs to be told?
It's so interesting, Dustin, because you're connecting to my immediate reaction, which is when I am vulnerable, does my story have any value? Does it advance the conversation? I'm no different or unique, and I'm not special, and therefore will anybody really benefit from it? So in a way, like what you connected to, in a way connected to where I fall into this idea of storytelling is, the thing that I'm doing isn't unique, so why would anybody care? The problem with that thinking that I've acknowledged is that every person is, you can be unique and not be special. Like, I think sometimes those things conflate. Like, we are all unique. At the same time, one of our core kind of beliefs here is that a lot of what we see in the world is very polished, and we miss that part of what happens, what you just identified, that navigating from, basically ignoring what happened to embracing it, and that there's powerful story in the learning that happens when you're willing to be vulnerable and reflective. And so one of the things that I hope to learn about myself through this year or 2 years of learning together in public is how to embrace that my story is going to be valuable, not only to myself, but to somebody else it will connect with. It doesn't need to scale to thousands of people, which I think is another thing that we kind of misinterpret. And I'll share it back to like professional development. There was a point in my career when I was developing professional development, and I wanted to impact 500 teachers, and it was like, if 500 people didn't come and didn't benefit from it, then I'm not doing it. And what you learn eventually is like, look, if 5 people come and it makes an impact in their classroom in some way, then it was a valuable conversation, and it had an impact on kids. And so again, in that same way, when we fail to tell our story, we are denying others the opportunity to learn. I'm going to use the word alongside of us as opposed to from us.
Yes, because stories inspire. Stories inspire. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, I'm thinking too about that concept of fear and courage, and how special, unique, whatever word. I think that there's another piece of that too, is that what are we going to learn about ourselves when we share? That there may in fact be places where people don't agree with us, or where we're wrong, quote unquote, or we've made a mistake, or we've caused pain, or we have to shift something or change something. And that's really scary. There's a part that I keep thinking about in all of this too, of the letting go and the loss, and how scary that is. And how sometimes we avoid telling the story because we don't want to have to do something about what we really realize or find out, or what comes to when we do share that story. And I think about that a lot in teaching. As teachers, I think that oftentimes we're really afraid of sharing the bad days or the hard classes. I'm air quoting that. And the places where we aren't, going back to what Chad said, where we're not polished. And I think sometimes it's because of a million different things that have nothing to do with us, but sometimes it is something to do with us. Sometimes we struggle with classroom management. Sometimes we aren't really as organized as we always want to be. Sometimes we forget to have something be engaging. Sometimes we don't want to let go of the book that we love that doesn't resonate anymore. And that's scary. So we'd rather not talk about it. So that's the other thing that I'm thinking about too.
It reminds me of a quote that I saw once, that vulnerability is essential to good pedagogy, and how important it is that, like Chad has mentioned, like we might not think much of our story, but whenever we're talking to our students, how much that can resonate with them. Like sometimes, like I have to remind myself, like something in my story, which to me doesn't seem very interesting or inspirational or whatever, because it's my lived experience, that there might be a student who's struggling with something that if I open up about this, then they can really connect to that, and I can build a relationship with them and give guidance and help based off of that. So just that idea of vulnerability being essential to good pedagogy is something that I tell myself on a very regular basis.
If I could share a little bit more about my story as it relates to that vulnerability, in my new job, I have committed to sharing my learning beliefs when I tell my story to people. I've included that in as a commitment to me to remember why I do what I do and grounded my work. What I've noticed is that by my willingness to declare my beliefs about learning and why we do what we do, it has at times, I don't want to say given people, but maybe helped people find the courage to either declare their beliefs publicly, or a side conversation after we're done with whatever we're doing where someone says, hey, that's something that I connect with. And so what I had to do was be like, it's okay to say, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. It's okay to live in that. And I know there are people who reject that. That's okay. but I have been rewarded more than not by being willing to be vulnerable and share those beliefs with people.
So I usually bring the conversation around to the back half by sharing a curiosity. So listening to all of you, one of my curiosities is, if I was to say it as an open question, I might say, do these barriers sort of lead back to one why? Like, why these barriers? Or if I was to make a closed question, I might say, like, do all these barriers lead back to leadership?
I was actually going to go to leadership with my next point, is that if you don't have a specific title in leadership, then is it your place to tell the story of what's happening in your school? That myself, I don't have a leadership title. I'm a school librarian. So is it my place to tell that story? Or should I defer to the leadership of the school who have the titles to do so? So that's something that I do question with myself is, do I tell the school story? Do I need to tell a rehearsed story based off of what the idea of what our story should be? Or do I just go out and say, this is my experience and this is my part of the story from my perspective?
And related to that, how does the person with the official title create the space for other people to step up and do that? And that's okay to do that.
Well,
and I think formal or informal, I think, to me, it all just seems to be going back to leadership.
I think that my gut instinct on that is when a leader embraces those mindsets of wanting people. So like another part of our that we're testing this idea of mind shifting is that we're going from telling one story in isolation to telling many stories together, right? And so my gut, when I hear Dustin as a leader, is to say, well, why would I stop you from telling the story? And if I hear something in your story that I don't love or that doesn't feel good, I should want to go back to that other mindset of learning from what happened. And so I think that what I would want for you as a leader, if I was in your sphere, is for people to feel empowered to tell that story and to not just have that invitation, but to learn together about what the storytelling tells us. And so I think, to Randy's point, it probably always comes down to leaders who create the space and create conditions for people to evolve and grow in these spaces. And yet I always have that little thing, the little angel or devil on the shoulder, whichever it is, which is also to say, we have to wrestle that back, that fear of what others might say in a smart way. Like I'm not advocating you blow your life up over telling a story. At the same time, like there's probably places where we could interject ourselves a little bit more than maybe we might. And also, I know I paused to let it someone else, but I also think that sometimes we get into the formal versus informal storytelling of where the spaces and the context by which we tell stories also matter. So, a podcast like this or a blog post, which are, evergreen in the sense that they're public and they're there, we might have a different conversation than we might have an informal conversation with someone within our own context. That is fair and reasonable and appropriate, but is also a form of steps of collective storytelling too. All right, I will be quiet now.
I think that might be it, Chad. Wrap it up.
Well, okay. So we always wrap this up with a curiosity. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of space here for a couple of seconds. And is there another question or curiosity you have around storytelling that we might challenge those who are learning with us to think about as it relates to telling their story? And so if I'll leave about 5 seconds here. Is there another question that anyone has, like Randy posed, around storytelling?
I think as a non-titled leader, how do you build agency in others to tell their story?
Love that.
I like the point that Dustin made too about who gets to tell the story and then who decides is always my wondering.
I wonder in our various capacities. So if we're a leader in a classroom of learners, or we're a leader at an organization of adults, to that point, how do we build the trust and the capacity and remove the barriers of fear that keep people from telling this rich story, because every one of those stories, creates that strong tapestry, that culture that we're trying to build. So how do we remove those barriers from whatever it is that's keeping people from wanting to do it, whether it's encouragement, whether it's modeling, whether it's engendering trust, those kinds of things. So Randy, do you have any more questions? I know you had asked a profound one already. So
just building off of Dustin's comment, including students in there too, like how are we helping students to tell their story? How are we building the conditions for them to exercise their agency around their own stories too? And that actually ties back into our earlier conversation around grading too, and letting them tell the story about their own progress and their own growth in their own time.
So all good inquiries lead to more curiosity. And we hope that as your mind begins to shift, that you will share your thoughts, ideas, and questions with us in our community at the Human.School. We wanted to thank everyone for learning us alongside of us in this edition of the Human School's Mindshift Card Conversation. Visit the Human.School and its Learning and Public Hub for additional resources, and join the conversation in our Facebook community committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. I'd love to thank Dustin for joining us tonight for this conversation. We're really grateful, appreciate it. And as always, Rachel and Randy, it was so great to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Chad and Rachel.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Bye.